And I'll just say this, I'm thrilled to be back in Namibia, and I'm thrilled to be talking today with Yvette and award-winning Namibian author Rémy Ngamije.
This is The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. On this episode, we have a super special guest as Rémy Ngamije joins us to discuss his story, 9 Months Since Forever, found in his collection, Only Stars Know the Meaning of Space, a Literary Mixtape. And stick with us as we share a short bonus conversation about another story, The Giver of Nicknames. Peter Orner has called into The Lonely Voice from a variety of places over the years. His home, a library, a podcast studio, his office, Chile. But this time, Peter is in Namibia, a country that means a lot to Peter Orner. So we thought it fitting that we should invite another great writer living in Namibia to join The Lonely Voice this time around. That's right. We're breaking our own rules again, because for this episode, it won't be just Peter Orner and me talking about a story. No, for this one, we have the author himself, Rémy Ngamije. And we're not talking about just one story, but two. Rémy Ngamije is an award-winning Rwandan-born Namibian author. His books include the award-winning The Eternal Audience of One and the book we'll talk about today, Only Stars Know the Meaning of Space, is his collection of award-winning fiction, and the subtitle of that book is A Literary Mixtape. The first story we're discussing is 9 Months Since Forever. It puts me in the mind of stories by Raymond Carver that explore the themes of friendship and marriage among the working class, people who struggle with disillusionment and communication that sometimes falls short. I imagine people always make comparisons between Rémy Ngamije and other authors. But these stories are in a class by themselves, partly because they're set in Namibia, a country on the southwestern coast of Africa. But even for American audiences, the characters and situations can also be very familiar. Case in point, 9 Months Since Forever. The parenthetical subtitle of this one is Cicero's Interlude. Cicero's our protagonist and first-person narrator. He tells us about the ways that, quote, marriage gives you someone to blame when you have to miss a night out with the friend group. The thing is, Cicero loves his wife, Nicole. She is his friend, his person. But Cicero is torn between this reality in his life and another one, the grip that his friends have on him. Nicole seems true blue, loyal. But this is also how Cicero describes Rambo. He's a guy who, quote, keeps showing up to serve in the trenches of our lives, throwing himself on grenades and carrying the wounded across mine-ridden marshes with bullets zipping past him, says Cicero. It's also Rambo, out of all the guys in the group, who really knows that Cicero loves Nicole. And it's also Rambo who says that Nicole makes Cicero feel loved. That's why we call Rambo the Sage, says Cicero, because he's the only one brave enough to use cataclysmic words like love. Rambo was his best man when he married Nicole, and he invited the other guys to the wedding to keep the peace. It's the other guys who perhaps don't have the words or the understanding about this big life transition that Cicero has made, and their inability has a gravitational hold on Cicero. It's a part of him he has trouble shaking off. He recognizes that even though they are part of the games and carefree days of childhood and are men now, they were, quote, still in the same place in many ways. Cicero is still growing into his married life, but he doesn't mind it at all. He really enjoys it. There are things he cannot admit to his friends about this part of his life. Says Cicero in the story, I found myself with Nicole, and now I'm not so sure if the squad and I are still down for life. I mean, I've already promised this life and the next to my wife. And yet, in the critical moment when Cicero must defend his wife and his new role as her husband, Cicero does something that shows this dilemma, this duality that continues to bring tension to his friendships, his marriage. Here now, Peter Orner and I welcome the totally marvelous Rémy Ngamije to The Lonely Voice. We're talking about 9 Months Since Forever from the book Only Stars Know the Meaning of Space, a literary mixtape. And stay tuned for a bonus conversation about another story from Rémy Ngamije.
We are thrilled to be talking to one of Namibia's leading writers, editor-in-chief of Doke magazine, author of just wonderful, and I had the great advantage of reading The Eternal Audience of One, what, 9 years ago now? Is it? Maybe 8 years ago? Remy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I was just blown away by this manuscript. And this was before it was published, and then it was published in South Africa, and then it was published to great acclaim in the US and all over the world. It won a special mention at the Grand Prix Pan-African de Literature and won the inaugural African Literary Award from the Museum of the African Diaspora. And Remy has a second book out now, Only the Stars Know the Meaning of Space, his collection of award-winning fiction. And we're here to talk about at least one story, and maybe two, from this collection, 9 Months Since Forever, which is a wonderful story. And we rarely do this on The Lonely Voice, to have a living author talking about their story, but we made an exception because we wanted to bring you this wonderful Namibian writer to more of an American audience than he already has. So thanks for being here, Remy.
I really appreciate it, Peter and Yvette. Thanks for making this possible.
We've both been reading and rereading 9 Months Since Forever. And Yvette, you want to start with a question for Remy about the story?
Just one? Okay, let me see. I have a lot of questions.
Or five, or seven. It's all good.
Remy, this question about married couples and friend groups. I think you nailed this whole situation. Where did this idea come from?
I've always been interested in married couples because I grew up in a family of a married couple, my mom and my dad, up until she passed. And I could always, from a young age, see the way married people act together, and then the way they act to their children, and then the way they are to family friends, and then the way they are to other married couples, and then how they are to the rest of the world. So I've always grown with the institution of marriage around me. And then as I grew older, became a teenager, became a university student, left university, friends started getting married, entering this institution. And it's such a strange thing for your friends to start entering into, because that necessarily starts correlating into your status with them, as far as it pertains to, for example, me and people that I would call my best friends. When your best friend gets married, the wife, it's almost from a guy's perspective, it's almost like you're competing for your friend's attention, their loyalty, their trust. You might have been part of the boys, but now he's no longer part of the boys. Or he is, but in a nominal sense. Because I think to make something as very involved as marriage, you have to invest a lot of time into that other person. And that comes at the cost of other human relationships to a certain degree. Some become richer, some are ignored, some fall by the wayside. This is the normal course of things. But I was very interested in, because my first experience of marriage was as a child in it, and then as a friend with friends around me getting married, and all of us trying to figure out how this new thing will shape our friendship landscapes. I've always been interested in the way status changes affect friends. You go from boyfriend to fiance to husband, and status changes affect people. You go from friend to best friend, that's a big status change. You go from stranger to boyfriend and or girlfriend, and that's a big status change. You go from best friend to mortal enemy. Oh, that's a big status change. And I've always been interested in how those things affect people and how people relate to them. And so, in the context of this story, marriage is an institution that's always been around me, that I'm not strange to. I've been a participant as a child, right? As the child of a marriage or of a union. And I've been a friend. I've been a groomsman. I've been in the church when people share their vows with each other. So this is an institution that I've seen, that I've been a part of. And then I participated in this institution when I got married. And so those status changes over time, just you start thinking about them and they're funny, some of them, and then some of them are hurtful and painful. And when you're in that zone of transition, I don't think transition's ever easy, but it leads to, I think it's rich territory for storytelling. I think any state of change is a good scene for storytelling.
There's a wonderful moment where when Nicole asks her husband Cicero in the story, they're talking about one of the guys in the friends group, the closest one, the one that was the best man at their wedding and is the one that Cicero feels the closest to, and that's Rambo. And what's interesting to me is like when you bring in this other person into this group, their ability to see is different than ours might be, right? Nicole reads Rambo differently in a way that is sort of unsettling to Cicero. And I'll just read the scene.
Mm.
You know, he says, Nicole says Rambo isn't okay. She says he's a nice guy, no lies, but he's really hurting. I tell her he misses his mom. She died on his birthday, I tell her, and etc. And then she says, no, she says it's something else. It's a hollowness inside him. I snort and say that's abstract women. Women talk. She rolls her eyes, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder if you could talk about that moment and when somebody sees something from the outside that you know, that the character doesn't
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
because they've been inside it so long.
Oh man, just before we started this interview proper, we were talking about basketball and the San Antonio Spurs. And when you're playing a game, any game, right, you're in it. You're just thinking about hitting this ball or passing that back or catching this pass or dribbling past that person or skating past this person. And all you can see is this thing in front of you. A lot of friendships are like being a player in the game. You can only see this thing moment to moment. And, your friend or your teammate might catch an injury and you're like, yeah, they're injured and they'll be out on the sidelines for a while. Or, they got injured 6 months back and then the recovery trail, but you're in the game. You're not privy to the things that are outside. Whereas someone who's watching the game not only sees everything that's happening, but they can also see like the fight that breaks out at the popcorn machine on the fifth floor of the stadium or something, or they can hear drama in that aisle or 5 seats down. They just see a lot more. And so when I think about Nicole in that context, she sees this friendship group in ways that this friendship group cannot see themselves because they're so involved with each other. You can tell they're very close knit, but they're friends, and so they don't see each other in ways that she can. I don't think it's a woman's abstractness or intuition. I think she's just a person who sees things that other people might see, but they interpret them at perhaps maybe a shallow level, and she's able to like sense a little more depth. I don't necessarily attribute it to her being a woman. Cicero does. And a lot of husbands will say this about their wives. Oh, they read too much into things. But when you're not the one in the situation, you can see other things.
She definitely gets the last word. She says you should pay more attention to your friends, especially him.
Yeah.
It's just like it's a like she's like, look, you gotta wake up. You can't. Cicero and his friends are staying in one place, and Nicole is, move forward, and they can't.
Hmm.
Especially Cicero can't see that his friend is, probably changed a lot since he's known her.
Yeah. And it's a strange place where, I mean, these guys are friends and you can be friends for years and you can still not know your friends. We know this about people that they're made of multitudes and their depth and they're layered and all of that kind of stuff. But there's this blindness that I think certain male friendships have because they see their friends as one way when they're actually another. And a third person, like Nicole, who is now married to Cicero and therefore gets to see how they interact with each other, is like, yo, I don't think your friend is fine. And it's the same, the opposite can also be true. Cicero could be part of Nicole's friendship group and say, I don't think that girl likes you. You see things about the people that you're involved with that they can't see for themselves. And that leads to, oh, it could lead to a lot of friction, What happens when your wife and your best friend don't get along? In 9 months since forever, it's not the best friend, but it's a friend in the social circle that does not necessarily get along with Nicole or Nicole doesn't like, right? But that still causes friction because he's part of the boys and Cicero's part of the boys. But what happens when your boyfriend doesn't like your best friend or your wife doesn't like the person that you've been friends with since you were 9 years old? That leads to like interesting friction and tough choices individuals must make. Within the context of 9 months since forever, you can tell that they're a newly married couple. They're still figuring out their strides with each other. And while time is not a factor, is not like something that they still have time on their side, right? To figure each other out and figure out a whole lot of things. But already in the beginning, you can see like, ooh, there's friction, there's things they have to figure out.
I'm wondering about something here, Remy.
Hmm.
In the section where this is on page 246, where it says, he's a cold and cool dude. Once I asked him what he thought about Nicole, and he said it didn't matter. All that mattered was what she made me feel, the man I was around her, and how I felt. He used the word love. That's why we call Rambo the sage. He's the only one brave enough to use cataclysmic words like love. My man, he said, all that matters is that you're seen. He dead-ass looked me in the face, like with eye contact and shit. I see you, sis, and now you're seen. I'm really happy for you. I had to look away. So Cicero, okay, this is where it gets odd to have the author of the story in the Zoom call. Sorry, I hope I'm not totally way off here, but
We're not used to this. We're not used to having like real, the writer in the room.
we just geek out without the writer in the room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
But I'm looking at this idea of I had to look away. Part of the friction for me is where Cicero is maybe a little bit more in line with Nicole, really sort of could be more in his feelings, could be more in tune with how he's perceiving his own friends and how he's pulled into, what the first line of the story says, the one thing marriage gives you is someone to blame. There's this thing that's hanging there where Nicole is not on his team, right? Because he's on the side of his friends. So there's such an
Mm,
interesting tension there with Cicero, with himself,
mm,
where he can see what Nicole is talking about, or he can begin to see what Nicole is talking about when she says something about Rambo. And then
mm,
where you see where Cicero himself is trying to pull back from feeling things as deeply as she does, maybe.
No, that's such a on point observation. Um, Cicero's so it starts off saying, but the one thing marriage gives you is someone to blame, and it provides examples of how you get married, you start doing this new thing, and depending on whether you're strong enough or real enough or whatever enough to say, oh, I do this thing because I like it, not because my wife made me. There's a lot of these things that happen in everyday conversation. Oh, the wife made me do this, the husband made me do that. But you're like, you can just say you like matcha, dude. You don't have to say your wife made you get matcha. Like you've been getting matcha every day. Just say you like it. It's fine. Like, it's cool. Or, oh yeah, no, oh no, now I'm starting to like, he's making me watch the NBA draft or like make me watch the Philly Eagles or something. It's like, it's cool to say you like that this person has brought something new into your life that you like, right? It's cool to admit these things about yourself. It shows growth. But at the same time, this person can introduce things or ways of seeing, ways of being that you're not 100% comfortable with. With the discussion about Nicole and Cicero's friend Rambo, I think there's a tangible fear within Cicero that if you see with a capital SEE, then you'll have to know with a capital K. And there's a safety in not knowing certain things about your friends. If you come to the truth about certain people, certain circumstances, then you have to either act on the truth or live in or feign ignorance and live in not even ignorance, but you you choose not to act. Like, yeah, you act via omission. And so with them, it's a situation where I think Nicole can see and she has certain ways of being and she vibrates a particular frequency. One of the things that works between her and Cicero is that they're close, like they're in sync with each other in many, many small and subtle ways. But that final commitment to the marriage, right, to this union where you're committed and you're like, oh no, we're in it. It's you and me. Like we gotta go through this thing called life together, right? That might come at the expense of like what he ultimately discovers or knows about his friends, and whether that means distancing himself from them. And I think it makes sense within the greater context of this collection, but sometimes you're friends with people just via proximity. You know, it sucks to say it, but they're the best available option in a particular geography, right?
And this is what is so interesting about the story to me. It turns a typical story like this on its head completely. This guy, Cicero, I mean, Rambo he genuinely likes, but the other guys he doesn't really even like that much. But you say they were the people that there in that given moment in time, and that was his group. So in a weird way, not in a weird way, but in like a pretty direct way, the marriage kind of saves him from having to do that anymore. Like you just don't read stories like this. Like A, it's a positive story about marriage, which, when was the last time we read one of those, Yvette, right?
Yeah.
And B, it's sort of like he sort of like defines himself through this, which is like usually not it's just it's a kind of a beautiful thing that's manifested here.
Yeah, I agree. I think Cicero does find his confidence and a sense of himself by being distance from his friends. So, friendship groups, any social group will have big, loud personalities. It'll have the quieter ones might be shafted to the side a little. There's the male ego. There's all of these factors at play. And what winds up happening in any social group is some personalities become more dominant than others. Not everyone is friends in the same degree as they are. So there's always that one person who happens to be at the center of the group, and everyone else relates to the group through that person. But if that person's not there, then that group doesn't like, they don't actually make an effort to meet and whatnot. So, like with Cicero, he's friends with Rambo, but not necessarily with all the other guys the same thing. It's not like if Rambo's not around, be like, well, I don't necessarily want to hang out with you. And I think this marriage presents that status change that we spoke about earlier for Cicero, because now his friends have to be graded on a scale that they didn't have to be before. Before they were just all boys, friends. But now he's married. And when you're in a union like this, it takes time to get to know the other person. You have to commit fully, like dive 10 toes deep in this thing to fully, I guess, enjoy the gifts of this thing and to also ride out through the challenges. You can't really half-ass it, you know? And so through this, he's learning a lot about his commitment to his friends. And I think there's maybe a sense of fear. It's like, yo, once you know, then you know, and you can't unknow. But you're right. You're right. This marriage does save him from a lot of characters that he would not otherwise want to hang out with. And Nicole knows it, and I think everybody in this group knows it to a degree. And Peter, something that's different that I think about now we're talking about, what if the group is like also envious of Cicero? Like he
Sure.
found someone to be with other than us. Like it's
That's definitely going on.
like maybe they want that for themselves, but they've either made choices that steer them away from that thing. There's something about also not being trapped, but like can I use masculinity as an example, or the sense of self we all have about ourselves when you see like a dancer just moving and they don't care about the world, they don't care whether it's wrong or whether it's perfect or not. But there's a sense of like they've transcended beyond the human gaze and they're not afraid of judgment, they're not afraid of getting wrong. They're just like, I love this song, I'm gonna dance to it and whatever, you know? And so there's a sense when you watch people who have reached that sense of joy and freedom, and you kind of envy them, and you're aware that it's very simple to just go across and join them in the dance. It's also hard for certain personal reasons, things that you might have learned over years of your life, societal constraints. And so it's also might be a case where these guys in this group are seeing Cicero leave the group, and he's got a union and another friendship outside of this group. That's a tough status change to like have to come to grips with, no? If you think about it.
But he likes being with Nicole. He says, I huffed and I puffed about all the modifications Nicole made to my life when we got married. The morning
Yeah.
meditation routine, relaxing. The lunchtime meetings at our favorite cafe, so necessary. The evening spent watching Grand Design's dopest show ever, right? But when the homies were out of sight, I breathed easy, found a
Yeah.
telephone booth and exited it, looking forward to going home and putting vases on our now comic book free floating shelves. He likes being with her, and she has what he calls wife vision. She has this weird
Yeah.
ability to know what he's thinking even before he tells her. But in that same little section where he's talking about that, he acknowledges something that Lindo says. Lindo says it isn't that hard to see through guys. All you have to do is look. Lindo, I think, is the closest to Rambo in terms of temperament. With Franco and Rinslow on one end, Rambo and Lindo on the other. Sometimes I feel like I'm the middle child who doesn't have enough of either parent to proudly claim him, which I guess is why I gravitate even more strongly toward Nicole. And then, of course, Rinslow doesn't get along with Nicole because she's the only person who doesn't entertain his bullshit. So there's such an interesting thing that he's able to see about Nicole, about
Mhm.
the friend group and being in the middle even of the friend group, not just caught in the middle between Nicole and the friend group, but then within the friend group. So there's a lot happening to Cicero all the time about his friends and his wife.
Yeah, it's so, oh man, like, can you imagine being in that type of friend group where there's five of you, two of your boys are this way and two of your boys are the other way, and there's always like two differing opinions about anything. Like, generally, you all have a consensus about what it is that you like and what it is that you're about, but there's these four personalities that just are left and right, and you're always in the middle, and this new magnet shows up out of nowhere and starts dragging you out of that circle. It's an interesting thing because, this is perhaps something to think about if the timeline keeps stretching right towards infinity, yeah? Nicole, he says that Nicole is the one that he gravitates to, but it's not like he pulls himself out of the group by himself. There's something in Cicero that's willing to be led, right? He's he's obviously in a better space now, and we wish happiness for him. But if you look at it objectively, he's always bouncing between poles. It just so happens that Nicole is good for him and he's strong enough to gravitate towards that positive pull in his life, yeah? And so he sees and he knows, and there's a sense of awareness within him that is capable of grasping, like, okay, so these two guys are not really they're not my cup of tea, but these two guys, yes. But I'm in the middle and none of them really encapsulate all that I am or whatever. And then this his new girlfriend who becomes his fiance, who becomes his wife, is that thing for him. But there's also a certain inchoateness or incompleteness to him because he doesn't define himself within himself. It's always bouncing between people,
Yeah,
right? Does that make sense of it?
it does. I mean, the mere fact that he invites all the guys to the wedding to keep the peace is, is a very kind of telling thing around what you're talking about. And he says, I was so happy to become Nicole's husband. I
Yeah.
always felt like I was the sidekick in the crew, just some dude who was there for the lead character's development. And Nicole makes him feel like he's the main person. I really do hear what you're saying. And what is that about in terms of Cicero
Mhm.
in this space with these particular guys? And we do learn a little bit about their background. What is it that keeps pulling him back into this role that he doesn't even necessarily appreciate, right, as the sidekick, just this other guy? And why
Yeah.
can't he just give himself over completely? Why does he need to stay so connected to the friend group? And, he says, I hadn't yet realized I'd acquired more than a wife, an equal partner, a crutch upon which to lean whenever I needed an excuse. I hadn't yet realized. There's something very interesting happening there, too, with this acknowledgement as he's telling the story, sort of maybe some time has passed, but he can acknowledge that there's still room to grow in his relationship with Nicole. Obviously, this is what's happening in the story. He's still in the middle. He's still in this push and pull and had not yet realized that when you're in this kind of relationship, you have more than a girlfriend, fiance, wife, this other person, but you have a partner. And there's something that keeps pulling him, as we see, back into this group, love it or hate it, and he doesn't necessarily even want these guys at his wedding, but he has to invite them. They're part of the group. It's just something that he has to do.
He's not out of the woods yet, and I think that there's tension for me throughout the story, and especially at the end, when there's these beautiful lines. We were still in the same place. None of us had moved away. We were probably never going to. And I feel like there's an acknowledgement at the end of the story that, that we are in early days, and that Cicero he, like you said, he seems to sort of like go with, kind of the win sometimes. And I'm hoping for the best for him, but I feel like the kind of, I left the story feeling like kind of like melancholy towards how this is going to go. And the kind of just the truthfulness of it, and him, it ends on him with him and Rambo, not with him and Nicole. It's just kind of an interesting way that the story lands for
Yeah.
me.
So to try
Yeah.
and rope those two strands of thought together, perhaps the reason why Cicero feels the need to still have this friend, despite finding this other relationship that is so much richer, so much more colorful, so much more fulfilling,
Yeah.
is the presence of geography and how geography can also determine that sense of survival of or community. Two people finding each other and being able to make a successful life together is hard, but trying to do it in a challenging environment makes it a lot harder. I think geography, to a certain degree, can also play a very big coercive factor who you can, in how quickly you can shift your social circle and how slowly you can't.
Because how can you move forward, which he clearly is, while at the same time acknowledging that he's in the same place and none of
Indeed.
us have moved
Yeah.
away? Like
Yeah.
that's huge. It's huge.
I've always wondered how people can be heartbroken in New York because there's so much to do and so many people to meet and there's this and that and the other. Until until I was in the UAE in Dubai, and this is big and this is cosmopolitan, and I speak English and I know this, that, and the other about random things about the world, so I can make friends easily. And you find it hard to make friends. And so the opposite of that is when you're in a small part of the world, is that the friends that you do have, they're all that you know, and you're very aware that if you let go of them, or you distance them, or you lose them, it's also going to be equally hard to replace them because there's not that many people to choose from. One of the things Sister, I think, is aware of is just, we're here, man, and we're friends because of this. And although this marriage of mine is dope and I'm happy and I'm in love and I'm learning new things about myself and my partner, I still have these friends that I came up with. And that's another big factor, like the time factor of friendship. It compounds. So even if you don't like all of them, you've been with them since, let's say, the fourth or fifth grade. And so I live in a place as well where the friends that we've had in primary school, we're still friends to this day because we've either all left the country and come back, or some of us have never left. But there's the options are quite frankly limited. So you do the best that you can with what's available. You're friends with people because they're in the area.
Yeah, and there's a beauty in that. My friends from Chicago in high school are still the closest people in the world to me. and
Yeah.
yet I do regress when I'm around them. You know what I mean? And so, I like to imagine being with them all the time. I mean, I don't know. That's tough, but I just think there's like that phrase. You dance with the ones that brung you dance with the one that brung you. You know that
Yeah,
phrase.
yeah, 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 yeah,
I just feel like that's kind of like what that's what we do. And
yeah,
you gotta honor this. And I feel like Cicero is right in that transition period. And that's how you started this conversation. Like he's in that transition period. We just don't know how it's going to go yet. I think it's going to go well, but it seems like he's acknowledging that he's sort of moving away, and yet at the same time, he's not in a different geographic space. And I think that's significant.
yeah. I think it's important, like you said, that's the one who you came with. That's such an important thing to understand that, the people you come up with are very, very hard to let go, even if they are flawed, even if they're not always the most pleasant of characters. But at the same time, Peter, you're talking about your friends from way back being, you regress. Maybe it's not regress, but like it feels like around the friends you've had the longest, especially let's say friends like these in the story, it always feels like when you're around them, certain instances, it just feels like you come home from a long day at work and now you can let it all hang out. Shoes off, belt flies that way, t-shirt off. You're like in your caveman behavior. And it feels like sometimes those friends do that for your personality. This is like, let's just leave the pretense and let's just be guys or gals or whatever the heck it is that you want to be. And we can be just kindred spirits. And I think there's something rich about that. And I think to a certain degree, maybe that's what the group offers to each other. Just like this end of the workday release where you're like, bro, it's just us. Like with all of the complications that come with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that also the very thing that Nicole sees in Rambo that she says is this hollowness that he's really hurting. Then in that next section, Cicero says that Rambo's the toughest guy he knows. I don't think I'd survive half the shit he's been through. That dude is a born soldier. And he goes on talking about Rambo. And Rambo is the guy, despite his disappointments and setbacks, Rambo keeps showing up to serve in the trenches of our lives, throwing himself on grenades and carrying the wounded across mine-ridden marshes with bullets zipping past him. And the other guys just sort of come along in the group. But Rambo, the same thing that Nicole is seeing as, there's a problem, there's a hollowness, there's an issue with Rambo. But then we learn these other things from Cicero's point of view, and it just seems like this is such a stand-up guy for him. He admires him. Rambo
Mm,
is, a real ride or die, and
mm.
someone who's very hard to break up with, I would say, for Cicero.
And
I
I
mean,
get the sense of Rambo, there's a whole story behind the fact that they're getting older, things are happening to them, and a lot of shit's happening to Rambo. It's not on the page necessarily, but it's there, and you can even in that kind of knowing that he's the one that's going to live the hard life for us. He's the one that's going to have these sort of pains that we may not experience. I thought that again, it's just kind of hit really hard when
yeah,
I think about the people in my own life who have had a harder time. And I feel like you kind of approach that without overdoing it. It's really subtle, but it's certainly there.
thanks, man. Thanks. I really appreciate that. And Yvette, what you point out is the best way I can define it is there's this thing that I heard in a podcast a very long time ago, and it was explaining that thing about the full saying behind blood is thicker than water. And I was so fascinated by this saying and what they were talking about. And so I found out through listening to this, and I can be corrected because it's been a while since I've investigated this thing. But the full saying is that the blood of the covenant is stronger than the water of the womb, meaning
Hmm.
that the people that you meet through struggle, through trial, through tribulation, the people that you make alliances or friendships with through very, very, very tough times, those bonds are sometimes stronger than the people who you might call siblings, right? Because siblings don't have a choice in being related to you. But the people you meet through trauma and tough times, those people have a choice in being around you and being a friend and supporting you. So there's like this deep, intense loyalty that can exist in a lot of friendships that a lot of other people cannot understand, especially when Cicero described Rambo in that way. That is his guy who has been there for him through thick and thin, who has probably stopped him from being bullied in high school, who has probably put in a good word for him with Nicole, the girl that he likes, because like, yo, I like the girl, but I don't know what really will go into that matrix of things that Cicero admires about this guy. But the way he describes it, it brings out that saying that the blood of the covenant is stronger than the water of the womb. This is his new person to whom that he's attached to in ways that a lot of others will not understand. And I think they're all attached to each other through these ways or through Rambo. But there's this thing within this group that supersedes all other, what you'd call, I guess, rational reasons for being friends or not being friends. And so there's this intense loyalty. And I say loyalty because I think that's right, that you cannot explain to other people. So, and we were talking about basketball teams beforehand. Like there is a strange group psyche, a group of like group suffering when you have supported a team that has been losing for years and years. And it forms, and you can meet a stranger on the train or on the bus, but you see they're wearing the same shirt as you. And there's like a little nod, and you're like, maybe this is our year, or like, yo, we're in the trenches together. And then that rapturous moment when, I don't know, that team wins this thing that it's been chasing for like half a bloody century. First franchise trophy, whatever that might be. And this sense of like, you go through this eternity of misery and then you win and then you look at each other and you're like, oh, we're in this until we die because now we've won. Like now we have to see the next 50 years out with nothing. And so there's this thing that also happens with, I think, friends, especially ones who have been there for you, regardless of their character. And friends in need are friends indeed. So it's not about the nice times.
Yeah.
It's about the bad times and whether they show up and whether they're around. And you can have characters that you don't like be there for you in tough times when the people that you do like are absolutely absent or they're not doing the emotional help or support that they should be doing. And they're still there. They're still there. There's a big gravity in presence, like just being there. And Rambo's there for all of these guys. And that's why Cicero's like, oh no, that's my dude. That's our guy. That's my Red Sox. Like we're riding this out until they win. That's that weird human sense of like, oh no, but me and Yvette go way back. Like, don't worry, we haven't spoken in 5 years, or she might have said that thing that I didn't agree with that one time, but that's my girl. Like, when the apocalypse comes, like I'm with her. Like we're together. So there's that comes into that friendship, and it'll
That's
be
true.
interesting, timeline how the marriage affects that, or this, that, and the other. But for now, I totally see Cicero's point, and I totally see why Nicole can sense this about this guy, can see this third party thing happening. It's like watching Saving Private Ryan. Like, you can see the story from the television. But when the bullets are whizzing around you, ooh, you gotta love the one you're with and you gotta trust the person that you're with. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so even after Cicero and Rinslow, they have words and they have to be pulled apart. And it's Rambo who's driving Cicero home. And he says, when Rambo drove me home, he asked me what had set me off. He'd never seen me like that, not in all of our years surviving this place that corroded our childhood and forced us to calcify armor around our soft characters. I mean, just that line carries so much weight about exactly what you're saying, Remy, exactly what you're saying about the ones that will carry you through, even if you don't like them all of the time. And what is this loyalty about then? Well, it's about this. I'd never thrown down with Rinslow before, the scrappiest of our crew. Rambo asked me why the heck I was prepared to be sent home bruised or broken. And then he thinks about what he wants to say. I wanted to tell Rambo that even though he was the coolest guy I knew, he had nothing on Nicole and the truth of her. I would have told him there and then that I was bowing out of the sad, cyclical story. I wanted to tell him we were like the third, I love this, like the third season of a Netflix show, thin on substance, a tad heavy on hard humor, with characters who lost their shine a long time ago. He wants to tell him he does get it. He does understand, but he cannot move out of here. He can never say the words to Rambo. And so when we think about the first line of the story and what happens next,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's such that's actually so, it's strange hearing the words that you wrote being read back to you. Um, I've never heard them read or narrated back to me in that way. And it's so sad. And it's so, oh man, it's so sad and it's so tragic. Like, tragic being, there's so much potential that will be unfulfilled. That sense of like that thing on the balance sheet that you look at and you're like, that can never be reclaimed or that kind of thing. And it's so sad. And there's also another layer of sadness. Like there's sadness when you don't know what's happening to you or what's happening around you or what's going on in the world. But then there's that deep-seated sadness that comes from knowledge, from knowing, and that sits with you for a very, very long time. And I think it's something that'll sit with Cicero, this knowledge, this deep knowledge about who they are, about what they lack, about the reality of the situation. I think it's something that he's going to sit with way beyond the turn of the page. And I think the magic of the short story and of the form, the reader picks up the story from there, and they get to decide and orchestrate what they think will happen in Cicero's life, and what will happen in Rambo's life, and what will happen in Nick Cole's life. But at least as a fundamental grain of truth, Cicero is aware about who his wife is, is to him. And then he's also aware about who his friends are and who they are not to him. And so there's like enough information, I think, on the page for the reader, whoever they are, wherever and whenever they find the story, to decide, does it end well? Does it not end well? What do you think happens next? And I've always found that to be like the magic of the short story, how you're given enough to balance like the fate of the whole universe type of thing. But yeah, it's so sad, like the way you read it. I've never heard it, I've never had it read back to me. And so it's just so sad. And I'm the writer, but I'm hoping things are all right, man. I hope
Sorry.
You hit it like we don't know, and that's what any great story is going to do. It's not going to give you an answer. It's going to give you a question, and so the question here opens up at the end in a way that is, because he's going to be stay friends with these guys too, like that, like we've talked about, and so there, I don't know. There, like, yeah, I think that's really wonderful to hear you respond to the way Yvette read. I just want to say that the book itself, which is so wonderfully designed, and I just want to, and we don't normally talk about collections as a whole, but make an exception tonight for everything. And Only the Stars Know the Meaning of Space the subtitle is a literary mixtape. And there's an A side which follows Cicero primarily and his friends and his family. And then the B sides, which are stories that are they have echoes of what's going on in Cicero's life, but are independent. And it's a beautiful kind of evocation for me of what stories can do, which is hone in on one life, but also be intensely curious about others. And I do want to say, like, the story I was thinking of, Remy, the other day that I couldn't come up with the name of because I was on a flight and didn't have the book in front of me, is The Neighborhood Watch. That's the one I want to do another show on that at some point if you'll do that with us. Because that story's haunted me forever and ever and ever. And especially haunts me now that I'm back in the city. And the other thing I want to say is that and I'm going to talk about like as if you're not here, but but Remy as a writer captures the spirit of this very strange city, Windhoek, Namibia, and in a way that no one has ever, and I'm not sure they ever will. There's this idea that like if the Chekhovian idea of like the more provincial you are, the more universal you are. I think it totally applies here. The better and more intensely you write about Windhoek, Namibia, the more people are going to understand, you know? And so Windick is not a character in this particular story, but it is in the next story, which we're going to talk about it for a little bit. But I just wanted to point that out as a writer of a certain city on Earth, there's nobody better. So I just want to point that out.
Thank you. I really
Um,
appreciate that. And
on the very first line, of the eternal audience of one. It's
yeah,
on, at least it's on the first page about Windhoek, and I was hooked from that moment. Can we talk a little bit more about the giver of nicknames, which is the
yeah,
fuller evocation of high school life? And I think it's great when we just lead off and just maybe a story. I mean, it'll take us in all kinds of different directions, but maybe a question about the giver of nicknames, if you don't mind. I've certainly got a number in my head.
This story, I've been carrying it around, and it's interesting. I was thinking about this idea of high school and, the personalities in high school and the nicknames. But it's just this idea of how we grow up with nicknames or even secretly giving nicknames to people, and there's a kind of a mean-spirited quality about it sometimes and sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a name that suits the person. But to be the giver of nicknames in this particular story with the narrator that we have here, you were saying before that there's a certain sadness in hearing somebody read the other story to you. This story, I think, for me, carries the weight of a lot of sadness for a lot of different reasons. And I think that the giver of nicknames is holding so much around injustice, the heaviness of growing up without a father, and guilt. So there's so much in this story. I mean, it's a short story and it just carries so much. When you read the first part and you realize that he's going to talk about the four categories of Donnie's, then it's sort of like, well, how's that going to go? And it does, and it just works. All of this to say, the giver of nicknames is a character, I think, that is really, really holding so many things and so much weight and so much sorrow about what he did and about what he didn't do, and also
yeah,
and
yeah,
also about what was done to him.
yeah, yeah. In fact, you're the first. I think I've only ever heard this twice when someone said, "Yeah, I think you're the only second person to ever point out that yes, in the give of nicknames, this person, this high school student who is quick of wit and he's athletically gifted and he's smart and all of this other stuff at this private high school with similarly placed children around him, some richer, some poorer. Obviously, there's a scale. Growing up in this tough environment in Windhoek, well, the school is not tough. I'll say the greater city is tough. I think it's only the second time that and it's also been a woman who pointed out the first time that yes, he did something, there's something he didn't do, but there was also something that was done to him that's not acknowledged. He is witness to something that is traumatic, and he does the right thing. He comes forward with it, and that thing is buried, and it's made to act like it wasn't. But he knows that thing happened, and he brings and he does what he can do at that age in those circumstances. Just say like, I saw this happen, and it really did happen. And what the system does is it tells him that, no, are you sure it didn't happen? Well, haha, these things don't always go the way you think you saw them, so think twice, think yada, yada, yada. There's coercion from the system, there's coercion from his mom's side, from his parents' side. And then you realize, shame, this poor dude is gonna have to sit with this thing for the rest of his life, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also stuff that he's done that he does instinctively, not because of what has happened to him in his life, but because high school makes you become a particular way. There's jockeying there's ego jockeying, there's who's popular, who's not popular, who's not funny, who's got that pimple. There's all of these things happening in high school. And then there's where the pain of the story really comes in, where he realizes that, as much as he might hate this other character, one of the Donnies in the story, for what he did, the other Donnie also points in is like, wait, you also did this thing. Like we're both guilty. And there's something about, knowledge that you come to as an adult that can be disturbing about who you are as a person, and that can be uncomfortable. And you probably have to spend a while with yourself working through things about, well, this is who you are. But then there's also like disturbing knowledge about you and the way of the world that you might encounter as a child when you're not ready to process everything. You're intelligent because you're book smart, but you're not wise in the ways of the world. Like you don't know. And that can also be strange and confusing. And so yeah, you're the second person I've ever heard say like, but also what was done to him. And yo, that's tough. That's tough. That's Yvette.
Yes.
Like, read. I think like, yo, you are reading. You are reading. You
Uh,
read.
yeah. Well, the thing about this idea of the guilt, how he also is guilty of doing something, that's
Mm,
so real. And I think that it moves the story to a much higher and higher place for me to have that
mhm,
complexity in the character, and that's just so real, because without that element in the story, he wouldn't seem, the verisimilitude would be sort of absent. It would be like, well, the character's so perfect. He saw this terrible thing happen and he told, and this poor guy, the end. But that's not
mm.
the whole story with most of us. Most of us are
Yeah.
carrying around a lot of other things, not just being able to note an injustice or realize that adults do also terrible things by trying to erase something
Mm,
terrible that happened, and the corruption and the bribes and all of this. That, I mean, that is a very difficult experience for a young person. Not just
mm.
what he witnessed in the locker room, but then what he witnessed in the principal's office, right? I mean, and then what he did himself. But I just feel like the whole thing, every single component of the story with the narrator, just makes him someone that I recognize even more, and that I appreciate as a character in the story even more, because there's just a very painful honesty there that you don't always see in stories and books.
Oh no, I appreciate that's so generous and kind of you, Yvette. Really, like your readings have been amazing, and your questions are awesome. With the narrator, with the give of nicknames, which is what he sees himself, or you know what's strange? The give of nicknames, that's the nickname that's given to him by someone else.
Yeah.
We're like and now I'm thinking about it, it's like that's such an who he is. He's just he's called the giver of nicknames. And so nice he becomes the giver of nicknames. But this the guilt that you point out, it's so heavy, and I think it's thick. And the reason why I think it's thick in the narration of the story is because when you look back at certain epochs in your life, let's say high school, I like to think I had a good high school time at my high school because I fit the system. I was the perfect poster boy kid for a private Roman Catholic school. I fit so I got through the system relatively easy, right? But then you look back on it and you're like, wait, why was that thing normalized? Why was competition taken to such extreme levels? Why was there a need to know every little thing to the nth degree? And what was the need? How did the school get all of this privilege and all of this access and all of this, that, and the other? And that sense of guilt, I guess, that you ask in today's world where we're asked to be aware of our privilege and our access and how that determines the quality of our life is something that I think about a lot. But in the writing of the story, it was just so important, right? Because man, I think when I got to the give of nicknames, I was in writing Zen. I can't explain it, man. I was in writing Zen where everything I touched turned to story. Oh man, I
Yeah.
can't remember like where I was. Things in my life were so good. I was comfortable, I was stable, no real shocks to the system. And I was flowing. I thought like, let me hook this up with that thing and see if it works. But even during that Zen thing where you just feel like you're at the height of your powers or whatever the heck that might be, Peter might have a better explanation for this trance-like state you are in when you're writing and what you're writing makes sense to you and you can like hold star fire like with your pen. You're like, oh my goodness, that feeling of writing. I don't know what it is, but let's call it Zen, writing Zen. Yeah, I was in the zone. But the thing that in that zone that stops the writing from just becoming, I guess maybe arrogant or inflated or too full of itself, is that you're writing a story about a human, a very young person who's also just figuring out the world. And what I know about young people, having been one myself, everyone being one, having been one at some point or will be one at some point, is that not everything makes sense. And even if you try and become hard, like the guys in the previous story, in 9 months since forever, you're still soft. You're still a gentle person. You can calcify, you can become hard, but that's not who you are at your core. And so in the story was just the thing that stopped the Zen from just flying off the edges. And it's so weird, man. It's like, that spinning top at the end of Inception, where it's like the speed keeps the top balanced, but if you just topple it, wobble a little bit or slow down, then the top spills over. That's like that writing Zen where if you become too full of yourself, then it's like, and I just had to remember, like I'm like this character and what he experiences and what he goes through and what the other characters go through. That's what really kept the top spinning. And I remember rereading the edits and multiple edits and having it published and then rereading it again. It's a state of storytelling trance or whatever thing
Hmm.
that I've never gone back into.
Wow.
It's happened with other stories, it's been different. But Giver of Nicknames was really, man, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I was channeling, but what you say about guilt is very true. And I think that sense of guilt, many types of guilt, the things that he sees, the things that he goes through, is what really, for me at the end, made the writing of that story possible, where it didn't feel just like a flex, if that makes sense. It just that sense of guilt, like that sense of like child where you know something's wrong, but you don't know what's wrong and you don't know how to explain it and you're carrying it and you have to sit with it, not only now, but possibly forever. That for me is what really grounded, gave gravity to that story.
And I think that's such a universal thing. I think exactly what you just said. Like, even if in the moment you really don't know, you just know there's something not quite right here. And when you can
Mm.
look at it in hindsight and maybe give words to it to describe it, and you can't really capture it completely. You just recognize it maybe as traumatic, even if you don't label it that, but that's probably what it's close to being. I think that's
Yeah.
such a universal kind of a thing. Thank you for doing a second one, Remy.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Yvette.
Well, I'll just say maybe I'll add one thing about the story if it comes in is that I think the ending, and I won't give it away, but it's, and I think it goes to a lot of what you guys were talking about is that, the narrator in the story sees something horrible and does something about it, even if that's arguably, at least to some characters, a little bit late. But I feel like the ending on Blanco, Donnie Blanco, was just incredibly bold, and also, kind of like it puts you as a reader into a kind of free fall after that, because it turns everything we'd sort of heard in the story on its head a little bit, a lot actually. And
Mm,
the whole thing with Fatty, the kid from the US, who wants to be called African American, and they make fun of him for it, and the whole incredible distillation of groups in Namibia, which are incredibly complicated. And anyone reading your story would start to understand, you know, even if they never set foot in this country or this city, they would start to understand sort of the dynamics that you see every day on the streets here, through your work. And I think that's, I mean, you're bringing again this place, and you may think it's, we're a little bit out there, and it's a little bit off the track, but it's,
yeah.
it's as real as any place on earth, of course. And I just felt like that paragraph about, the bastards and coloreds and et cetera, just explaining
Mm.
what it's like to be a kid in that social structure, I thought was just stunning. So
If we could do this again sometime, I'd be very happy.
I'm down. I've got number time.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for what a thrill, Remy. Thank you so much for doing this.
I appreciate it. Thank you for taking time and getting to the studio on that side in San Antonio. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and it's Peter will know about being in Windhoek and, sometimes feeling lonely
Yeah.
here as a storyteller. Like it's a weird geography, it's just a weird place.
Yeah.
But I'm not joking when I say like I've never heard 9 months since forever read back to me. And I've never felt sad at my own work. I've always
Oh.
felt like, like, yeah, I wrote that, but I've never felt sad.
Oh, I don't want to
And
make you
so,
sad, but
no, 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 no. What I mean is that I guess maybe in this time in the world right now, like it's
yeah.
just between readers and writers and storytellers and their listeners in the audience, there's a desperate need for community. And so thanks for making the time to just engage with the
Oh.
story.
Oh my
Really
gosh, it's
appreciate
totally my
it.
pleasure. Thank
Yeah.
you, Remy. Thanks for saying that. And I hope
Yeah.
we talk again very soon. Rémy Ngamije is the author of 9 Months Since Forever and The Giver of Nicknames. Both stories can be found in the book Only Stars Know the Meaning of Space, a literary mixtape. Rémy Ngamije is an award-winning Rwandan-born Namibian author, editor, publisher, photographer, literary educator, and entrepreneur. His books include The Eternal Audience of One. His fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in the Johannesburg Review of Books, Lit Hub, Granta, One Story, and Best American Essays 2024, among many, many others. Read more about his writing and his complete publishing history on his website, remythequill.com, REMY, thequill.com. This has been The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner from Texas Public Radio. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.